The more, Blade Runner is not just a film. It is a question whispered in neon rain. Most fans remember its smoke-soaked skyline, the endless downpour, and the melancholy voice of its future city. Yet few ever grasp what it truly cost to bring that vision to life. What if the movie about artificial beings and false memories was itself born from very real exhaustion, heartbreak, and disillusion? What if the movie's haunting beauty came from pain behind the camera, not just artistry on it? Let's pull back the curtain. Let's walk through the storms that drenched every frame. Let's explore the moments the cast kept quiet for decades and the truths they finally revealed. Because what the Blade Runner cast shared years later doesn't just deepen the film, it changes it. The reality of its creation rewires the way you see every flicker of light and every drop of rain. The year was 1982. Cinema was shifting from the bright optimism of Star Wars to darker, more grounded visions of the future. Ridley Scott was still glowing from his success with Alien. Warner Brothers wanted something big, something stylish, something that could stand beside George Lucas's empire. Instead, what Scott delivered was a nightmare drenched in melancholy. The movie adapted from Philip K. Dick's novel, Do Androids. Dream of Electric Sheep was a loose transformation. Scott stripped away the metaphysics and filled the void with smoke, light, and silence. He imagined a Los Angeles that had lost its soul. Neon flickered against perpetual rain. Advertisements replaced stars. Humanity was reduced to paperwork. The studio executives didn't understand it. They wanted excitement. Scott gave them loneliness. They wanted clarity. He gave them dreams. The cast stepped into that tension from day one. Harrison Ford was already a global hero thanks to Han Solo and Indiana Jones. But here he played a man with no warmth, a detective named Deckard tasked with killing machines that seemed more alive than he was. Rutger Hauer joined the production as Roy Batty, the rogue replicant, whose quest for more life turned him into both villain and philosopher. Sean Young, the ingenue, played Rachel, a corporate creation who learns she might not be human. Together they built a world where reality itself felt like performance. Filming began on rain-drenched sound stages in Burbank. The sets were colossal and suffocating. Each was filled with real water, real steam, real exhaustion. Every day began under gray light and ended in artificial night. No one knew then that they were constructing the most influential dystopia in film history. For Harrison Ford, Blade Runner was not another adventure. It was a descent. The public saw him as confident, witty, and unstoppable. But the man on that set was tired of being the hero. Ridley Scott demanded stillness and ambiguity. Ford wanted clarity and emotion. Their visions collided every day. Crew members later recalled stretches where the two men communicated only through intermediaries. The tension leaked into Ford's performance. Deckard looked weary, not because Ford was acting weary, but because he was. The exhaustion was real, the growing resentment was real, and that emotional fatigue became the film's soul. Deckard's detachment mirrored the actors. He was hunting androids while questioning his own humanity. Rutger Hauer arrived with a different kind of energy. He was unpredictable, creative, and poetic. The crew described him as mercurial and brilliant. When he read the scripted death speech for Roy Batty, he found it too mechanical. The night before shooting, he rewrote it himself. The next day, he stepped into the rain and delivered his version. The crew fell silent. The line, "All those moments will be lost in time like tears in rain," came from Hauer, not the script. Ridley Scott said nothing. He knew greatness when he heard it. Sean Young, meanwhile, was trapped in an uncomfortable spotlight. She was young, talented, and beautiful, but constantly underestimated. Her co-stars treated her professionalism as arrogance. The vulnerability she brought to Rachel was not manufactured. It came from real insecurity. In interviews, she later admitted feeling isolated during production. Every glance of fear or hesitation on screen was authentic. That paradox defined the entire film. The actors were playing humans who might be machines while living lives that felt mechanical. The movie's emotional truth grew out of contradiction. The public image of confidence clashed with the private reality of struggle. Beneath the polished surfaces, everyone was breaking down. Now, Bruce, when production wrapped, the cast felt drained but proud. Then the studio intervened. Test audiences complained that they couldn't follow the story. Warner Brothers panicked. They demanded narration to explain the plot and a happy ending to soften the despair. Ridley Scott objected, but he had lost control of Final Cut. Harrison Ford was forced to record the voiceover. He hated it. He later admitted delivering it flatly, hoping the studio would reject it. They didn't. They used every monotone word. When the movie premiered in 1982, the narration diluted every ounce of mystery. The bleak ending was replaced with a borrowed helicopter shot of green countryside. Blade Runner became something it was never meant to be, a detective movie with a forced smile. Critics were confused. Roger Ebert called it cold. Audiences stayed away. The film barely covered its costs. The dream of Ridley Scott collapsed under the weight of compromise. But time is patient. A decade later, Warner Brothers discovered a work print without narration. In 1992, Ridley Scott released the director's cut, restoring silence and ambiguity. For the first time, viewers saw the unicorn dream sequence and understood the implication. Deckard might not be human. That single editorial decision rewrote film history. A movie once dismissed became sacred text. Every frame gained new meaning. The failure had transformed into prophecy. The cut that changed everything turned Blade Runner from a cautionary tale into a masterpiece. Nothing about Blade Runner was comfortable. The rain was real. The lights were blinding. The smoke burned eyes and lungs. The sets flooded nightly. Crew members worked in soaked clothes for hours. Electrical cables hissed in puddles. Technicians kept buckets nearby to catch leaks from above. Ridley Scott's perfectionism tested everyone. He demanded dozens of takes for moments lasting seconds. When Ford tried to improvise, Scott stopped him cold. When Sean Young asked questions, Scott deflected. He was obsessed with composition. Every reflection, every shadow had to align. Ford developed sinus infections from the wet atmosphere. His trench coat grew heavier each day. He joked that Deckard didn't need a gun, he needed a towel. Sean Young endured long hours in wigs and heavy makeup that cracked under constant moisture. Rutger Hauer trained through the night rehearsing his rooftop leaps until his knees bled. One evening, a camera operator quit mid-shoot yelling that no movie was worth this. Another crew member fainted during a late-night sequence. Yet, the work continued. The suffering became part of the art. When viewers later praised the film's authenticity, they were unknowingly praising real discomfort. The bleak realism came not from special effects, but from exhaustion captured on film. Blade Runner's realism was the price of obsession. The film hides its secrets in plain sight. Most fans remember the flying cars and neon haze, but the deeper story lies in the details. Watch the first minutes again. An eye fills the frame, reflecting an industrial inferno. That image belongs to no single character. It is the eye of God, or the audience. The reflection of flame inside a pupil mirrors the film's theme of creation consuming itself. We are the watchers watching ourselves. Another moment hides in plain sight. The unicorn dream. Inserted only in later cuts, it transformed the story's meaning. When Gaff leaves a paper unicorn at the end, it signals he knows Deckard's private dream. That means Deckard's memories are implants. He too is manufactured. Ridley Scott confirmed this interpretation years later. Harrison Ford denied it. The disagreement became myth. The lighting itself tells its own truth. Cinematographer Jordan Cronenweth used contrasting tones, cold blues for machines, warm ambers for emotion. As the replicants evolve and show empathy, the palette warms around them. The so-called humans remain trapped in shadow. Even sound hides messages. Listen closely during the Voight-Kampff test. The rhythmic hum in the background is not random. It mimics a heartbeat growing faster each time Rachel answers. The machine is measuring humanity while revealing it. These micro-details create a film that feels alive. Blade Runner invites you to find meaning in fragments, every flicker. Every reflection is a clue to the central question: how much of our humanity is real and how much is constructed by memory? The greatest conflict was not between human and replicant, but between vision and control. Ridley Scott fought producers on nearly every decision. The crew sided with Ford, who felt the director ignored actors' needs. Scott came from British advertising where visuals ruled. Hollywood expected collaboration. The clash was inevitable. Scott demanded endless takes, often focusing on tiny movements. Ford saw it as micromanagement. At one point, Ford told an assistant director he felt like a prop with dialogue. Scott, meanwhile, confided to his team that Ford lacked trust in the image. The standoff defined the mood of the set. When executives reviewed early footage, they panicked again. The pacing was slow, the mood alienating. They feared financial disaster. Scott was ordered to film explanatory shots. He obeyed outwardly, but quietly stored his preferred version. This tug-of-war between art and commerce created two films. The studio's Blade Runner was a product. Scott's Blade Runner was a vision. History eventually chose the latter, but only after years of exile. Ford later admitted that despite resentment, he respected Scott's precision. Without that obsessive eye, the film might have vanished, like so many others of its era. Their conflict became metaphor, the fight between heart and machine that the film itself dramatizes. Here lies the cruelest truth. Blade Runner was a movie about empathy created in an atmosphere where empathy was scarce. The cast portrayed beings learning to feel while often feeling unseen themselves. Rutger Hauer's Roy Batty speaks of love and mortality, yet Hauer himself fought producers who called him too intense, too foreign, too emotional. He channeled that frustration into his performance. Every tremor of pain on that rooftop came from real battles for respect. Sean Young's Rachel was built to be calm and precise. Critics once labeled her performance robotic. Years later, they realized her stiffness mirrored a woman questioning her identity. She wasn't robotic. She was awakening. The city itself was ironic. Built to feel eternal, it was assembled from discarded sets of other productions. The future was literally made of Hollywood's leftovers. The result was a haunting truth. Every dream of tomorrow is built on the ruins of yesterday. The film mirrored its own story, a creation that questioned its maker, an artificial being searching for meaning, a product that became human only after rejection. Blade Runner was never a warning about technology. It was a confession about creation. And on that set of constant rain and fatigue, the irony became tangible. They were not acting out a dystopia. They were living in one. It took years for the world to catch up with what Ridley Scott and his cast had built in that damp labyrinth of wires and rain. Blade Runner left theaters in 1980. Two, as a financial disappointment. Critics were cold. Reviewers called it pretentious, slow, overly designed. But in the underground midnight screenings of the late 80s, the movie found believers. Young filmmakers and art students saw something deeper, a mood that no other film captured. By the time the director's cut arrived in 1992, the revelation spread. Without the studio narration, and forced ending the film became pure experience. Audiences no longer needed answers. They wanted atmosphere. They wanted mystery. They wanted to drown in it. The cast began to feel vindicated. Harrison Ford said he finally understood the purpose of his character's detachment. It was not laziness. It was design. Rutger Hauer saw the movie turn him into a symbol of rebellion. His Tears in Rain monologue became an anthem for mortality itself. Sean Young watched critics finally recognize the humanity she brought to a character designed to be cold. The artistic world responded in waves. Painters, architects, musicians, and designers all borrowed from its aesthetic. The rain-soaked future became a visual language. Fact window: Blade Runner won the Saturn Award for Best Science Fiction Film in 1983, but its true recognition came a decade later, when the Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry. The movie that had failed at the box office became the most studied sci-fi film in history. Its ideas about empathy and identity were dissected in universities. The once ignored cast were now pioneers of modern emotion on film. The breakthrough was not fame, it was permanence. Every artist who touched Blade Runner carried part of it into the future. Ridley Scott used its philosophy of texture and mood to shape Legend and later Gladiator. Harrison Ford's haunted stillness influenced his later work in The Fugitive and Witness. Rutger Hauer became a global symbol for misunderstood anti-heroes. Sean Young's performance inspired later portrayals of synthetic humanity in Ghost in the Shell and Ex Machina. The film's fingerprints appeared everywhere. In Japan, anime creators like Katsuhiro Otomo built Akira around the same fusion of technology and decay. In America, directors like the Wachowskis and David Fincher borrowed its noir shadows and reflective loneliness. Even video games such as Deus Ex and Cyberpunk 2077 drew entire worlds from its blue and amber palette. Culturally, Blade Runner shifted the idea of science fiction from spectacle to emotion. It made futurism intimate. It made despair beautiful. And it asked questions that have only grown louder with time. In later interviews, the cast reflected on how deeply it marked them. Ford said that the movie aged better than he ever expected. Rutger Hauer called it his greatest gift to cinema. Sean Young said she was proud yet wounded by how long it took for the world to appreciate her work. Ridley Scott admitted that the chaos of the shoot was necessary because without struggle, art becomes sterile. The ripple effects were not just artistic. They were emotional. Blade Runner gave people permission to feel melancholy about progress, to miss a world that had never existed. It taught generations that beauty could live in decay and that identity might not need certainty to be real. The cast revealed in later years that the emotional toll of filming never fully left them. Harrison Ford described months of physical pain. He remembered stepping into rain machines at 4 in the morning with no dry clothes left. He remembered coughing through takes because fog machines filled the stage with chemical mist. Sean Young spoke about the loneliness of being the only major female performer surrounded by older male colleagues who doubted her talent. She said she learned to channel that isolation into Rachel's fragility. The character's trembling hands and uncertain voice came from real exhaustion and fear. Rutger Hauer carried the intensity long after filming ended. He admitted that Roy Batty's speech about the end of life echoed his own anxiety about being forgotten in Hollywood. When he improvised those words, "All those moments will be lost in time," he was not just speaking for the replicant, he was speaking for himself. Ridley Scott, too, paid a price. He left the production drained and at odds with the studio system. The fight over creative control scarred him for years. Yet he also said that the suffering was worth it because the film achieved immortality. Blade Runner was a story about mortality built by people who were confronting their own. Every frame carries that weight. You can feel the tiredness in their eyes. You can feel the longing in every pause. What the audience saw as artistry was sometimes just survival. Time turned Blade Runner into myth. By the 2000s, it was no longer a cult film. It was scripture. Every decade brought a new version: director's cut, final cut, archival restoration. Each release peeled away another layer, revealing new meaning. The cast grew older, but their memories remained vivid. Harrison Ford finally returned to the role in Blade Runner 2049, describing it as an act of closure. Rutger Hauer watched from afar, calling the sequel a beautiful echo. He passed away in 1919, leaving behind a career forever defined by that single rooftop monologue. Sean Young's relationship with the industry faded, but her image as Rachel remained eternal, frozen in rain and cigarette smoke. Ridley Scott saw the prophecy fulfilled. The themes of artificial life and human replacement were no longer fantasy. Artificial intelligence now writes music, paints pictures, and imitates voices. The question once posed by Blade Runner has become reality. What makes us human when our creations can dream too? Fact window. By the early 2000s, Blade Runner was ranked among the top 100 American films by the American Film Institute and cited by NASA scientists as a vision of realistic future urban design. The irony is perfect. The film about machines yearning to live has outlived its creators in influence. Its world continues to evolve without them, just as the replicants outgrew their makers. So why does it still hold power after 4 decades? Because it was never about technology. It was about the soul's search for meaning in a synthetic age. The rain never stops because memory never stops. The neon never fades because longing never fades. The city is endless because the question is endless. The cast's revelations make the movie human again. Harrison Ford's resentment and exhaustion became empathy. Rutger Hauer's improvisation became poetry. Sean Young's pain became grace. Ridley Scott's obsession became vision. Blade Runner endures because its imperfections became truth. It invites each generation to find itself in the reflection of its machines. It refuses closure. It asks you to feel rather than solve. It asks you to look at your own memories and wonder how many are real. It endures because the people who made it were as fragile as the beings they portrayed. They built art from exhaustion and doubt, and in doing so, they created something eternal. When you see it now, you are not watching science fiction. You are watching autobiography. Every bead of water is sweat from the cast. Every flicker of light is compromise turned into poetry. Every pause in Ford's performance is a silent argument between actor and director. The movie becomes a mirror. It shows how art and pain can fuse until they are indistinguishable. It shows how even corporate interference cannot kill honesty. It shows how truth sometimes hides inside artificial things. Blade Runner does not ask you to choose between human and machine. It asks you to accept that we are both. It whispers that empathy is the only proof of life. The cast learned that the hard way. In chasing perfection, they became imperfectly human again. That is what most fans never figured out. The film's emotion is not acting, it is confession. Listen to the final scene again. The rain hits concrete like static. Rutger Hauer's voice trembles as he speaks of dying things. Harrison Ford looks up in disbelief, not because Deckard survived, but because something impossible just happened. A machine showed mercy. That moment broke cinema's logic. It reversed the myth of the soulless robot. Behind the camera, the crew stood in silence. Many of them cried. They knew they had captured something beyond acting. In that minute, every conflict, every argument, every drop of rain became worth it. The echo of that scene still lives. It plays in advertisements in classrooms in the language of modern sci-fi. It reminds artists that humanity is not defined by perfection but by empathy. It reminds audiences that despair can still be beautiful. When Rutger Hauer died, fans around the world posted that scene as tribute. They called it the most human moment ever filmed. The irony would have made him smile. So now you see what most fans never figured out. Blade Runner was not built by machines. It was built by broken people who turned exhaustion into poetry. The cast revealed their truth, that behind the cold surfaces lived raw emotion and quiet rebellion. Watch it again with fresh eyes. Look at the reflections not as decoration but as memory. Listen to the silence not as emptiness but as confession. Do you believe Deckard was ever human? Or are we all just replicants of feeling chasing proof that our memories matter?